All right, so I'm Jeremy Fricke, and I'm Education Director at Tri-Faith Initiative. And you should be here for Making the Familiar Strange, about the second half of Noah. I think some of you were at the last session. We do these monthly. And this session, we're going to be focusing on the second half of that story. Let me just get my screen shared for you here.
Real quick, Jared, can you make me a co-host, please?
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Let's get this going. All right. So this program happens on the fourth Tuesday of every month, and definitely go on our website to register for the next one, which we'll revisit that later. But the next one will actually be on basically the Tower of Babel and the very first story of Abraham visiting Egypt in the Hebrew Bible. But let's go through a little bit of what to expect during this program. I see we have some new faces. So the goal here is basically twofold. One is to gain some basic literacy about these stories, these stories and these religions that are represented by these stories. And then secondly, we are also trying to see these stories through new eyes. You know, we often have some kind of experience with these, and you know, we should look at them again, right? So some ground rules are, you know, please try to speak on behalf of yourself. You know, everybody has a little bit different point of view, so please just be mindful that people may read the text differently or understand it differently. And then we're going to go through a little bit of a 10-minute overview-ish to kind of get some groundwork there. And then we'll discuss these particular questions. So also, I do want to also point out that there is no wrong answer. You know, just feel free to have a discussion. You know, I'm not asking these questions to get the right answer. You know, it's for us to learn about each other and to learn about the text. And I get this asked a lot, so I want to bring up some of the books I use. So I use the Tanakh that's published by the Jewish Publication Society. I use a 4-translation parallel Bible, like Christian-oriented Bible. I use the 5 Books of Moses by Robert Alter, which is a little more of a historical point of view on the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. And then when I look at the Quran, usually I use Sahih International, which is the most common, most popular. That's usually what you'll find. All right, so to get a little background about what we're doing. So last time we talked about the divine beings, the daughters of men and the evil of man. We talked about the warning and the building of the ark. And then we talked about the rain starting. And today we're really going to be talking about, you know, after the rain stops, after the flood has kind of come to a pinnacle, if you will, we're going to talk about that all the way through kind of the end of the Noah story through the Hebrew Bible and, you know, interpretation of the story. So as many of you know, so at this point we will see 3 main pieces of the story. The first being the process of the flood subsiding, which includes some actions by Noah and by God. And then we will talk about some of the blessings and the covenant made to Noah with God. And then we'll talk a little bit about sort of the aftermath of that, which is almost separated from the flood story, but we have some dialogue from Noah near the end of the story of Noah. All right, so first I'd like to kind of ground everyone in what the Islamic narrative is in general. So we talked about this a little bit last time, but I want to review it a little bit for context. So there's quite a few similarities. You know, the flood story in the Quran still has a kind of a traditional flood. There is an expectation. You know, Noah is a prophet. He's a righteous person, and but he does have a few interactions with God and with the story that are a little bit different. Sometimes we actually even imagine these things, you know, from Jewish and Christian perspectives, but they're not technically expressed through the Hebrew Bible. Things like it is very explicit in the Quran that Noah warns humanity. So in the Hebrew Bible, Noah is warned of the coming flood, but there is no explanation as to what exactly happens between Noah and the others. I think a lot of people imagine a warning to humanity, and that may be so. Also, Noah promises good rain at first, right? So a lot of the Noah story in the Quran is about faith, really. And those with faith are promised good rain. And then those who don't listen are warned of a coming rain that would be a punishment. Also in the Islamic narrative, the Quranic narrative, Noah speaks much more. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah very rarely talks. He only has one phrase, and it's at the very end of the story. And then also the traditional interpretation is in conflict a little bit in the Quran of like exactly what the limits of the flood are. So some Muslims believe that it was a global flood, fairly traditional to like how you might hear from Jews and Christians. Some believe that it's a more localized flood, that, and in some sense, the animals were local, in part because, and this is how I understand it, in part because the punishment from God would only make sense for those who were warned. So the punishment wouldn't be globally, it would be for the community surrounding Noah. All right. I also want to add, and this is kind of a general thing about the Quran. So the Quran does not use a chronological system like the Hebrew Bible. You know, there's kind of this focus on storytelling in the Quran, or in the Hebrew Bible. In the Quran, there's more of a focus on the moral of the story. And there's, for the most part, most stories are interspersed throughout the Quran. So you might have part of the flood narrative in one area, and you might have another in another area. They work together, but the story isn't shown the same way as it is in the Hebrew Bible. So one thing that we did not talk about last time is in the Quran, there's two main changes with Noah's family, or main differences with the Hebrew narrative. And it has to do with both Noah's wife and Noah's son. So as I said before, the Quran's Noah story is really fundamentally about faith of both Noah and the surrounding community. Noah's wife does not believe the warnings about the flood. And she ends up not boarding the ark. She ends up not surviving. Noah's son says he believes, but he has a little bit longer story about how he wants to, he tells his father that he believes that the flood is coming, but he feels like he should be on the mountain rather than the ark. And according to the Quran, the flood covers the mountain that the son was on. Many people interpret this as the son not truly believing. It's more like he's just sort of saying that he does. So there's kind of this focus on both the disbelief as well as fake believing. Fake believing is not good either. So, and this is one question that I'd like to ask everybody here. Noah barely speaks in the Hebrew Bible, but speaks often in the Quran. What does this difference mean to you? Do you think what do you think that means in the Hebrew Bible context, in particular, that Noah barely speaks? Feel free to just take a random stab at it. We're going to be asking a lot of questions here, and there's no right or wrong answer. This is just kind of how do you find meaning in these stories for yourself?
This is Joan. I wonder if, because you said that this is a narrative difference. For a narrative, you need a good story. Not that when I say story, I mean classical myth story. Mm-hmm. So this puts some personality into it versus just bulleting the facts. So I kind of like this because I can see people listening and saying, aha, well, maybe I sort of did that too.
I see. Yeah, that's a good point. Dialogue often does move the story forward. Would anyone like to add?
I'll take a guess.
The right answer.
Maybe it's just a matter of what's being centered. So maybe in the Hebrew Bible, since Noah barely speaks, what's more important is what's happening, the event, the flood. Whereas perhaps in the Quran, the fact that Noah speaks is they're adding some additional importance to his participation in the event, or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point too. The kind of like I mentioned actually, and I didn't make that connection before, but the kind of focus on the moral of the story in the Quran in general does lend itself to dialogue more. All right. Well, so we're going to have a series of questions, and most of them will focus on the Hebrew Bible. But if you are from a Muslim background, feel free to add how it interacts differently or similarly from your own tradition. All right. Okay, got this plan. So, what is the purpose of focusing on certain human characteristics of God? Would anyone like to repeat the passages to the right? Who wants to volunteer?
I can volunteer.
Thank you.
Shall I read both of them?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Noah walks with God. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and said, taking some of the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned last time that to my knowledge, this is the only time where God is described as smelling something. It's a less common attribute given to God, but in this circumstance, they do for the burnt offerings.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is the purpose of these kind of human characteristics?
Could it be to make God more down to earth to human believers and more tangible in a sense?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, for sure.
I don't look at it as being necessary that God smelled, but that he notices the worshipful aspect of this, and that the gratitude for God's forgiveness of mankind.
Okay, yeah, that's a good interpretation too. I mean, I find it fascinating. This does shift a little bit over the course of the Hebrew Bible, where fewer human qualities are generally ascribed to God over time, which is its own course. So, but let's move on to the next question here. So, would anyone like to read the two passages on the right this time?
I'll read them.
Thank you.
I am going to bring floodwaters on the earth. The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. The waters rose and covered the mountains.
Yeah, so this, so does the agency of the water matter? Is it meaningful? So, in this first passage, we see God is the actor, right? God is the one performing the action. He's going to bring floodwaters on the earth. And in the second section, we see that the actor becomes the water itself. The words could be described differently if we were to take a more literary approach. It could say, God rose the waters, right, in 7:18, or the waters from God, or there's a lot of ways to approach that would give the action to God. But is there a difference? I mean, does this matter?
I think it might matter, because my understanding of water, especially in Genesis, is it's a symbol of chaos and destruction. The Spirit hovered over the water really before God started creating, and so the agency of God sending the water, as contrasted, and I never noticed before that there's no agency, there's no one getting the water to rise. It's as though it rises on its own. That would be in keeping with a force that is chaotic and destructive, and maybe one could even argue, though I won't, that God kind of set loose this water and it took over.
Mm-hmm.
That's a valid way to look at it.
I was thinking that I guess I don't, even with that difference in language, I don't really view the water as having its own agency, because both, I think that's a little bit of like personification of the water, which I find an interesting way to interpret that. But then also, because God does say, I feel like the action is that God says in 6:17, I'm going to do that. Therefore, it is that God, mandated the waters to rise and to flood. And so the waters were just doing as if what God said.
Right. So, I mean, one thing to just add really quick is, like in the Quran, if I remember correctly, the Quran does give all those actions to God. So, God makes it rain. But you have a good point also that, the command, there's the command given, and then it happens, right? Madigan, were you going to say them? Nope. Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I was kind of gonna, I think Thomas pointed out kind of what I was thinking, a little bit of like, is it like a power transfer, or possibly my first interpretation reading this was like, or thinking about this was maybe is it an author's goal to maybe sort of shift the focus, or maybe like shift the blame a little bit. I don't know if you want to call it blame, but like this act of mass destruction, is it possibly taking sort of some of the fault away from God if this is something that is killing all these people and all these animals? I don't know. That was my first thought, but I really like what Thomas said. Thank you.
Yeah, and I really like what you just said there, because like, however, I think ultimately the fault is not with God, but it's with the people, right? That's why God is like, hey, you know, you got to learn a lesson, so I'm going to bring this on Noah. Hey, get 2 of every animal, right? You know, and so really, I think ultimately the fault is with the people, right? And God is implementing the punishment, but maybe along the same lines that you were thinking, like maybe it's that the fact that the water has to do it, and it's not just like God smiting or something, right? Is that is to limit the anger or action of God performing the punishment, maybe?
Yeah, you just said it way better than that was yeah.
Hey, religious studies degrees and master's degrees will do that.
Yeah. I like what you said, Amanda, too, because water is supposed to be also cleansing and healing and restorative.
Yeah.
And I felt like there wasn't much better way to show that the people were powerless, that this was out of their control.
Mm-hmm.
Right, natural forces, because they're at that point in time, that's how destruction or rebirth and stuff like that would have taken place, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Those are some good points of view there.
I have a question. This is Joan. Could it be transformative? Because as can't remember who was talking. When we are baptized as Christians, we are baptized with water, and we are to change how we live. And did you say that already? And I just was.
I think Lachelle mentioned that, but like a similar thing with baptism in Judaism. You know, there's the mikveh, and so that's supposed to, you know, clean of a lot of things. And when people go through conversion, that's one of the last steps of the conversion process, is to go through the mikveh, and that symbolizes our new life as Jews, right? So very similar in that. And yes, the water is both destructive and healing. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you. Amanda, that's exactly the point I was going to make. I'm a Presbyterian minister. I'm conducting a baptism this coming Sunday. And the words we say is, you're baptized into Christ's death and resurrection. And I was pause after death, because part of the symbolism is the destruction, the drowning of the old self. But then the new self arising is also cleansed. So the Bible, the waters symbolize both destruction and renewal, destruction and cleansing. And my congregation will be shocked at how much water I use. I'm new here, and I like to use a lot of water because it reminds us of the peril of becoming a Christian.
Yeah, that's a beautiful conversation. Well, let's move on to the next question. That was great. So, why are both a raven and a dove required to check if the flood stopped? This is one question that came up not too long ago to me, because I think we kind of overlook it. you know, and I'll just read this one since it's so short. But then Noah sent out a dove to see if the water had receded from the surface of the ground. The first step was a raven, and the raven doesn't find a place to land, and then the dove is sent out and brings back an olive branch, and that's when they know that the flood has stopped. Why? I think there's kind of a two-part question here. Why are birds required? And then the second is, why these birds? While you're thinking about it a little bit, I also just want to add that, in the Quran there are no birds. God tells Noah when it stopped directly.
I have to say, I don't know much about symbolism of a raven. The symbolism of the dove has been peace. So I don't know if there's an effort there to convey that. I don't know.
I mean, I'll mention that now this isn't Abrahamic, but in Norse mythology, ravens are generally associated with battle, violence. Crows and ravens are both kind of related to that. There aren't tons of ravens in the Bible, but this is one, and serves a particular purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one thing that I think of is that, so ancient people, I believe, would have asked similar questions of the stories. Why does this happen this way? Why is this important enough to keep in this story, which is not a very long story? There's only so many words used, and they're fairly succinct. So to me, the details probably mattered enough to be passed on and agreed upon by tons of people, right? The raven, if it is associated with violence, I mean, the flood is violent, right? And the aftermath is more peaceful.
I guess my kind of, oh no, I hope I didn't just lose it. I might have just lost it. Sorry. Never mind.
Karen in the chat says, I'm trying to figure out how to get the chat back up. Karen says they would have known the differences between a dove and a raven with what they need. Karen, would you be able to tell me more about what you mean?
Let me see. Thursdays. Yeah, here in Oiler.
So their dietary needs, nesting, landing needs. Yeah. So, they would have needed something very different. Ravens and doves have very different lifestyles. Another thing that fascinates me a little bit is, ravens are considered one of the more intellectual birds. Doves are not known as that intelligent birds. They're simple and peaceful and beautiful and sound very nice. But the raven is associated with some of the bad stuff but also intelligence. It actually kind of reminds me a little bit of the Garden of Eden stuff, right? A little bit of the knowledge of good and bad and life.
Excuse me if this was already said, but that intelligent piece just reminded me of this. Is it the raven that has the capability and that intellect to be able to see like, oh, okay, now we're ready. And then the dove is simply the signal, the firework of here, we're good, you know?
Yeah. I think that reflects a little bit of, I think, what Karen says in the chat also. That's sort of the problem solving and the signaling that the raven has maybe a more discerning eye. Would anyone like to read the two passages on the right here?
I can.
Thank you.
Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. So Noah came out together with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives.
Mm-hmm. So what is different about this instruction? Let's see, do we have the other passage? So last time we talked about how God asks Noah to board the ark by saying, go into the ark with you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives. So there's a particular order, and then it says Noah entered the ark with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives. After the flood, we see a slight change to how God asks Noah to exit the ark. Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. But Noah exits the same way he entered, by going with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives. Again, the first question is this, does this matter? But I think it's very interesting. We see a change in how God commands it, even if the command was not intended to be different. What might this change in instruction be symbolic of? Or why change the instruction at all?
Could it be a change in the way God views his creation?
Tell me more. What do you mean?
That since he put them through all this pain and suffering, he has a new relationship with essentially the next Adam and Eve of the world.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So he puts the sort of the relationship of spouse at the top after that, sort of like Adam and Eve. Is that right? So yes. So I'm answering the question in the chat here. Yes. So originally, at the beginning of the story from last time, Noah enters basically males first, women second. After the flood, Noah commands him to come out, basically the elders first, young second. But Noah still exits males first, women second. Does that make sense? I know it's kind of a complicated question, but I feel like it has a lot of interesting implications.
Did you see what Judy said in the chat?
No.
A change in the relationship of Noah and his wife. She now comes after the sons in hierarchy.
Right. So I guess to who, right? So the main change is that God commands it differently, after the flood. Otherwise, it stays the same. And God's command becomes that his wife is second only to him in the list.
I think it might also be important to note that in all the the previous instructions of Noah getting on the boat per the order God had instructed him, there was always Noah did as God commanded, Noah did as God commanded. And it might be the first time in this story or the second time or something like that where Noah doesn't do what God says, and there is no Noah did as God commanded. I don't know, maybe it doesn't really bring this up again, but maybe that could be a slight foreshadowing of the troubles that Noah's going to endure here in a few lines that I know we'll talk about soon. But I don't know. That's kind of what I think about a little bit of this when I read this.
That's a good point. There's a lot of depth. I definitely encourage you to reread that and think about it a little bit.
I'd just like to add, I've never noticed the difference in the sequence, and even reading it now, I'm thinking, what is the difference he's getting at? I wonder if maybe leaving the ark, there was a certain amount of danger. They've been there safe and out of danger for so long, and maybe sending the men out first was a way of sort of setting out the scouting crew or the reconnaissance to make sure that it was safe, which kind of implies that that the biblical view is that men tend to be stronger and maybe better at protecting.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point too. And I just wanted to mention that Karen says that this may be just a problem of men writing the Bible.
When I read both the story about the entrance and the exit, I don't see a significance to the order that they came out. I see a group went in and a group went out, the same group, and I don't recognize an importance in a sequence. I don't see the sequence in the coming in and going out. I just see a whole group come in, the whole group came out.
That's fair too. It may just be how it was, how that was written that way, right? You got to put an order somehow. And
well, actually, you don't have to. In the New International, it says Noah and his family.
Oh, that's and that may be just the simple implication.
Mm-hmm. But I like Tom's insight into it.
Yeah, I've also read that some people say, well, after Noah's flood, God is actually commanding a little more gender egalitarianism than he did before that. It's not perfectly equal by any means, but that there's a shift in prioritizing men versus prioritizing the elders, basically. Just one other way to look at it, and that Noah doesn't notice, or whatever that might be. Let's see. Yeah. Changing up the wording is a totally legitimate way to read that too. So, and this is a question I think we all should think about, and I think people long ago thought about. How would this destruction affect the people in the ark? Would anyone like to read the 2 verses here?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
And all flesh that stirred on earth perished, birds, cattle, beasts, and all the things that swarmed upon the earth, and all mankind. All existence on earth was blotted out. Man, cattle, creeping things, and birds of the sky. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark.
The first thing that kind of pops into my head about this is a little bit of survivor's guilt. You know, so whenever a tragedy happens and somebody survives that tragedy, a lot of times they feel that like, oh, why did I make it? You know, and why didn't this person make it? But then I also kind of think that it's really applicable to right now, and people watching, you know, like, obviously I don't know where everybody's at in their response to COVID on this call, but, you know, for me, being rather, taking my precautions, you know, but then at the same, and being in different roles that do have potential to change the spread of community COVID, but kind of just watching and not really being able to do anything beyond what I can actually control. So like for me, I think about seeing that community response and then sitting in my bubble essentially, and just not really knowing what to do anymore.
That's fair. Yeah. I think it'd be tough. Would anyone else like to add? You know, I mean, do you think people have questioned this throughout time to some extent? Is this something that you think most people would have thought about throughout the centuries? Have you thought about this? You know?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Oh, you go ahead. That's fine.
I was just going to say, I do think that people have thought about it throughout time, and I think they've compared it to other kind of great tragedies, or you think of like the bubonic plague. There's comparisons to like, oh, this is, you know, an act of God. He's cleansing the earth again. So. Okay,
yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, probably coming off of that arc when it was time, and if I know this is just a fictional depiction in this picture, but like if it was anything like that and I was Noah or someone on the boat, I would be a little jarred and kind of distraught, just seeing that was possible. And, you know, we aren't that far off timeline wise from when the first death had happened in the Bible. And so I imagine that they might be a little bit shaken and maybe shaken in their understanding of the world and what was possible and what God was capable of. That if I was them, that might be what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just to add, you know, Karen also says that it's, you know, that there's an implication that this would be a problem to deal with, you know, poison or disease. I mean, you know, getting off of this this boat, and I think we mentioned this in the last session, but this is kind of implied to be the first rain too. You know, that the floodgates are opened, and you know, in earlier in Genesis, it says basically that the ground is watered by mists or water from the ground. This is the first explanation of a rain. Let's see. We have quite a few questions, so I'm going to look at that. So, do you understand God to show any regret or remorse, or not, after the flood?
I don't think it was so much regret or remorse because he meant to do it, but rather just sadness that he had to. Just it greatly upset him to destroy his creation, but it was needed to cleanse the earth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. Would anyone else like to add?
I think it's interesting because it says, never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. And he speaks specifically about using water and a flood, but it never says anywhere that it won't potentially happen again via another means.
Right, that, and it says all life, and it doesn't mean that some life might not be destroyed. Right.
Right. Yeah. So this is if I remember correctly, this is the first time that the term covenant is used also in the Hebrew Bible. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's true. That's the first promise made by God to someone else. And that's something that is very interesting, because it actually puts God as and I'm going to talk about it as a character, in the sort of somewhat submissive role. I don't know if I have a better word for that, but basically he owes humans something by making a promise to them, right? Usually, the humans owe God, worship, sacrifice, commitment, right? Those are promises that are supposed to be made by humans to God. But there are a few times where God is the one who owes humans to some extent. And I hate to say that exactly like that. I'm not really sure what the best wording is, but this happens with Abraham also later, and Moses, but it doesn't happen super often. Okay, so a little bit of background really quick. So Noah plants a vineyard right away after getting off the ark. That's part of the text, and he gets drunk. So that's kind of the precursor to these two verses. Would anyone like to read those two verses?
I can read again.
Okay, thank you.
Ham, father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers."
So many people know that this is one verse that was used as justification for millennia for slavery, and in particular of people who are Black. But that's not the only way to read this, and I think it's important to recognize the history of some of these verses and some of these texts. But before this point, Noah doesn't speak. Why does the Hebrew Bible in particular put this is the only dialogue he really has? There's a lot to be asked about kind of the aftermath of this story.
I have a question. Rather than accepting his own responsibility for what he did, which was to probably get drunk, he passes off the responsibility to his kid. It's his kid's fault, not his. So once again, we see a very human Noah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very valid way to look at it. Yeah. I know in some Talmudic sources, it actually implies that seeing his father naked and the response of Noah implies a sexual act, that incest occurred by Ham, which gives a very different point of view on the curse as well. But it also is interesting that he curses his son's son, not his son.
Well, there's no way to hurt a parent like hurting their child.
It's true. It's true. It's a good point. maybe has a particular place in Abrahamic religions. I think it's especially important. That's an especially important relationship between parent and child. So also a popular kind of historical interpretation is that, Canaan is the patriarch, if you will, of Canaanites, which will pop up many times in the Hebrew Bible, usually in a negative way. So this can be understood also as an origin story, if you will, of the Canaanite tribe. That we have enemies as Canaanites, or Canaanites as enemies. This is how it came to be, right? This is the way that that negative relationship started.
I wonder if, I was just thinking about kind of like how, kind of what we were talking about at the beginning, like the difference between sort of chronological storytelling, like telling a story for the purpose of a story, and in the Hebrew Bible as compared to, getting a moral of the story across non-chronologically in the Quran. And I was just thinking about what might the author of the Hebrew Bible want us to remember about Noah. And when like you first think of him, you're kind of like, he had to be a pretty good guy. He was righteous, and that's why he was chosen to be the one to build the ark. And he was able to save himself and his family from this flood, and all the animals. But I don't know if ending it on this note with Noah and having the only thing he ever says be a curse, maybe we should remember him a little bit differently, and his what happened to him, and the actions of his life. What I was just thinking about what to take away from the Noah story, and there were a lot more opportunities where he could have spoken, in his conversations with God, and his reaction to the promise of a flood or the covenant, and yet the only time we really hear his inner thoughts is when he's been betrayed.
Yeah, it's a very emotional circumstance. As a side note, this part of the story does not happen in the Quran. Noah is pure and righteous. And he doesn't drink. So this is a totally different story from this part of the piece. So it would be different. Yeah, and kind of like you mentioned, Judy, basically he was betrayed by his children, and then so he curses the children of his children in some ways, right? So he has that, there's a sense of like, there's a parallel theme there where both of the negative action is performed by the sons, and then the curse goes to the son. Like the son of the son,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, I would like to ask firstly, does anyone else have any particular thoughts or questions about kind of the section that we went over? There's tons and tons of ways that we can look at this, and many questions that we can discuss. I hate to end it on too negative of a note, though, because this is ending with a curse is not the nicest.
Jeremy, get to the rainbow. Get to the rainbow.
Why don't we have a question about the rainbow? Okay, well, let's talk about the rainbow. What do you want to discuss about the rainbow?
I just wanted a happier ending than the curse. I thought I was saving you.
What was that? Sorry, I didn't understand.
Yeah, I wanted a happier ending than the curse.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I thought you would appreciate not ending with the curse.
You have a good point. So let's see. Does anyone have that right now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's read like
9:12.
Yeah, the covenant made. Yeah.
And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. When the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth." So God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life on the earth."
Yeah. I mean, firstly, does anybody have any particular questions or to discuss about that? I mean, the first thing that I think of, honestly, is that this is a bow placed in the sky, right? It's like the bow that shoots arrows. It's the bow that it ends up connecting to arguably Nimrod even. But the bow gets placed up, right? They don't need the weapon anymore, right? But there's some kind of peace associated with that.
I also always think of the bow as the shape of the ark, the underside of the ark.
Oh, okay. Tell me more about that.
I don't know, just
Okay.
pull it up out of the water and hang it in the sky. I don't know. It made me think of that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Reminder of the ark. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's always interested me that the sign of the covenant requires faith to some extent, because the rainbow happens after the rain. Right? So, the reminder of the covenant happens after the rain rather than before.
Mm-hmm.
And the reminder is to God, not to humanity. It's as though God is putting a string around God's finger, saying, I'm not going to forget this.
Yeah, kind of that difference in relationship when a covenant happens. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, would anyone else like to add anything?
I always hesitate putting things into the Bible that aren't there, but I see this as that God didn't set up to do this to destroy humanity, but to save humanity, and that's what came out of it: salvation. Mm-hmm. A small remnant, but humanity was not destroyed.
That's a good point too. He did not destroy all life. Right. The end. Right. He did not destroy all life. Yeah. Thank you all, everyone, for the discussion. I do want to mention a couple things really quick, and I'll let you go. One is, if you can complete the survey, Amanda has posted it in the chat. We really appreciate that. Give me any feedback. Give any suggestions. Is there any particular topic you wanna talk about? Is there what did we do well? What did we need to improve on? And then also, if you are interested in continuing, next month we are going to be doing what we're calling United and Divided, which will be kind of the next. Right now we're going chronologically, so it'll be about the Tower of Babel and that first story in Abraham's story about visiting Egypt and the Pharaoh with Sarai. And we'll be going through that, and Madigan will actually be helping with some of the questions for that. She's an intern here at Tri-Faith Initiative, doing a great job. So, and if, like I said, if anyone would like to, bring any more questions up or have any discussions, feel free to email me. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Also, please check out our events page in general.